When any developer has only one game on a console, you often wonder why just that is the case. Sure, sometimes a developer arrives late on a console's lifespan, but in the case of Kronos Digital, they were one of the earliest developers on the console. Their one and only N64 outing was Dark Rift, originally planned as Criticon 2, the follow-up to the lackluster PlayStation Fighter. It landed on Nintendo 64 in 1997, at a time when the console was still struggling for solid fighting games. The basic storyline in the game is that it takes place far in the future after Criticon, and the crystal that was the focus of that game has turned out to be the core prime element of a master key which holds the power to universe. The master key was found eons ago in a spatial tear which burst into 3 pieces, sending 2 of them into alternative dimensions, hence the game's title Dark Rift. The game spans 3 dimensions, which are the dark dimension where demons live, the neutral dimension where Earth is located, and the light dimension, which is a spiritual one. I personally found the storyline quite interesting, but I think it would have suited an adventure game, to be honest, but for a fighting game it does the job, and it's allowed the studio to really go to town with its character designs and art style. And that's perhaps the game's greatest strength. The characters coming from different dimensions have allowed them to offer a varied mix of 10 characters. Sure, you have the standard human-like characters you'd expect, but you also get ethereal characters to come into the mix. Add to this the fact that the characters were put together using motion capture, and they generally move as well as they look. There are moments of tearing and certain moves like sidesteps do look horrible, but if you stick to horizontal movements, everything looks quite nice. This in part is helped by the fact that the game runs in a smooth 60 frames per second. What may surprise you is that this was the first N64 game to achieve this, so kudos to Kronos. The different levels also have a nice art style to them. When you fight into the neutral dimension, you have a very Earth-like setting, but when you enter the other dimensions, the level designs take on more of a fantasy setting. This is pretty much where the positives end though. The fighting engine is certainly not one of the strongest on the console. Sure, the characters all have a nice list of moves and the controls are simple and easy to get to grips with, but the responsiveness of the characters is just not there. This turns many of the battles into simple turn-based attempts to starting to pull off combos. Because the game is so unresponsive, this causes huge problems on the higher difficulties or when you're playing the game with friends, because it's so obvious when you're trying to launch a combo starter. Each character also has 2 special projectile attacks. These can be used effectively against lesser opponents, but due to the amount of time they take to load up, it's easy for them to be sidestepped and countered, which leaves you open for huge amounts of damage. You can also grab your opponents and you get a nice cinematic shot as you punish your opponent by doing this, and this can involve a simple throw or a weapon blast depending on your character. Speaking of the camera, it does a fine job of keeping up with the action, and it positions itself perfectly for the most part, even if you move around quickly in the levels. While the game doesn't give you the opportunity to juggle your opponents, the combos can be devastating, and when you learn how to chain and link different combos together, you can have a massively overpowered advantage over your opponent. This isn't helped by the game's AI either. At times, even on the hardest difficulty setting, they seem content to let you beat them to a pulp, and then in the next round, they seem to do nothing but go on an all-out attack against you. It's unbalanced, and at times it can feel unfair. Dark Rift is quite a frustrating game. At times it shows signs of brilliance with the frame rate, tight controls, perfect camera and great styling, but the slow, methodical pace of the battles and very limited game modes makes this a tough one to recommend. As is the case with many other N64 fighting games, there are better offerings on the system, and aside from an afternoon's gaming, this really isn't a game which you'll be coming back to days or even months into the future. Dark Rift was the second of 3 games in a series by Kronos, which was referred to as the Trilogy of Terror, not because of the game's themes, but because all 3 games failed to impress critics of the time. Thankfully though, the game is dirt cheap to pick up now, and it's also quite easy to find. And so if you want to play the only game in this trilogy on Nintendo 64, then it's worth picking this one up. Just don't expect to replace your other fighting games. As always though, it's over to you. I want to know what you thought of Dark Rift, either from the past or if you too played it recently. Were you wowed into playing the game after seeing the great frame rate in video form, or did it look like another generic subpar fighter when you saw screenshots in magazines? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below, and until next time.